Let me just introduce myself before I introduce our guest today. Nick Robinson, I'm the political editor of the BBC. I'm delighted to be here, delighted to be joining not just people here in the room, but those people who are watching it live streamed on the internet. And we're in a very curious situation, probably not curious for Chatham House, but curious for me, is the first thing I must say is that this Chatham House event is not, repeat not, on Chatham House rules. It is on the record. So everything we're going to discuss is on the record, just to be absolutely clear with everybody. You can say whatever you like. Don't worry, it's absolutely fine. And if you want to comment on what you're hearing, there is, of course, a Twitter hashtag. It's hashtag CHEvents, and another one called hashtag AskCH. So CH events and Ask CH, and forgive me saying the obvious, but phones on silent or off, if you wouldn't mind. This is a really interesting opportunity at a time of a fascinating debate in the UK, but throughout Europe, about immigration, about migration, about freedom of movement, to talk to one of the EU commissioners responsible. For those who don't know Cecilia Malmström, just a couple of little biographical notes. She is the Commissioner for Home Affairs, as many of you will know. She was a minister, the EU minister, in the Reinfeldt government in Sweden from 2006, and before that an MEP. Dauntingly, in the way that only Brits do in European context, we end up listing the languages the woman can speak, when I can only speak one. Just so you know, Swedish, English, Spanish and French, German, a little bit of German, a little bit of Italian, so feel free to ask questions in whichever language you like. And interestingly, and this may be reflected in our conversation, she is, of course, a Swede who now lives in Belgium, but spent some of her time in France, lived and worked in Germany and Spain. So I'm going to ask a few questions, and then I'm going to open up to you to ask a few questions on this broad area. I thought it'd be most interesting, Cecilia, in a sense, rather than asking about any policy, let's just go way back to first principles. When you think of migration, immigration to the EU, and freedom of movement, related but different, what are your starting principles? And are they your personal principles, or do you believe that the EU and the Commission particularly has principles that you're there to uphold?
Well, yes, to your first question, second question, and yes. But first let me say I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this. Well, I think that these issues are very much European in a way, because we are 28 countries in the European Union. We cannot have totally separate rules on this if we want to cooperate in the free market. We have common external borders to a certain extent. We have Schengen. I know you're not in, but the rest of us have Schengen. We have international rules that we all have signed up to, like the Geneva Convention, and we have a set of values that we are all determined to defend. And they boil very much down to migration, freedom of movement. Freedom of movement is one of the oldest principles in the European Union. It's actually the most cherished one. If you ask citizens of the Union, what do you like most with the European Union? Well, the fact that I can move around and study and work and visit without traveling from northern Finland to Malta without showing my passport. So I think it's a great privilege to be able to work with these issues on a European level.
So that's within freedom of movement, but what about the attitude, the principles that underlie the idea of immigration into the EU as a whole, as against movement within?
Well, that is also, of course, related to that. We can't have two separate rules on that. But it also, I mean, the European Union is a unique context and cooperation of democratic states. We have our problems, certainly, but we are a setting that defends democracy, human rights, freedom, and people turn to us and ask for protection because they run away from states that do not give them protection, freedom, fundamental rights. And we have a moral obligation to respond to those needs. Of course, not everybody can come to Europe. We need a set of rules. But it's a decency issue that Europe, as the most democratic place in the world, also tries to help those who run away from non-democratic states.
I know you're very proud of the work you've done on asylum, and I want to talk about that. But if we take migration that is not asylum, economic migration, in other words, do you think there's a European principle established that migration is a good? We should be, as an EU, welcoming people in. It's good for them. It's good for our citizens. It's good for our countries. Is that your view?
migration globally is a good thing. It is the most important source of development globally, that people move. They send home money, they bring their ideas, they move on, they start companies. So migration is per se a good thing. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody can come to Europe. Of course, we need a set of rules. We need a managed migration. But as an idea, people moving freely in the world is a good thing.
What if European people don't agree with you?
Well, many of them don't. I get proofs of that every minute in my Twitter flow. But I think it's a very important issue to defend them, to try to defend some of these principles, but of course also managing it.
But in a sense, I think that's what I'm asking you. Who's we? I was very struck on your website. It said the EU is facing an important election in May. We, my emphasis, must continue to defend free movement, stand against intolerance, and recall that migration is an asset and a success factor. Who's we? I mean, if there's an election, what happens if the electorate don't agree with any of those statements? What happens if they choose to vote first for UKIP in this country, for the Front National in France, if they choose to vote for all? Who's we? And who is the Commission to say we? Because you're not elected.
No, we are appointed and confirmed by the European Parliament and others. Many of us have been elected many times in our country. Sure. I have, certainly. But it's true, we're not elected to the Commission. So we, in that sense, would mean we, the Commission, we as representatives of certain values enshrined in the treaties that most Europeans confess to. But certainly there will be lots of people who do not feel we, and who feel that what I'm saying is not at all what they believe in, and those parties you mentioned and a couple of others will have lots of votes in the European Parliament. That worries me. Maybe it worries us as well.
But, touche. But the reason I asked the question, I think, is it's quite interesting, is there is perhaps a rather British view that the Commission are really just civil servants. They're kind of officials. They're shorn of politics. And they should do what the electorate tell them to do. So the reason I'm pushing on this is, are these European principles, or do they just happen to be the conventional wisdom of the particular elite that currently runs the European Commission, and you're rather resistant to changing them in the face of public opposition?
Probably. No, but they are written down in the treaties, and in that member states represented by the elected leaders and prime ministers have agreed to put on the treaties.
Interesting, good. Okay, well, let's move on to a little bit about the politics of this. It is sometimes claimed, and I just wonder if you think it's true, that there is a movement in member states, amongst their governments, not amongst the smaller parties who may do well in the European elections, against what they call the, quotes, abuse of freedom of movement. So it's sometimes been claimed here that Germany, the Netherlands, Austria, Sweden, your own country, have got concerns. Do you detect that? Do you think that's true?
Well, I travel a lot around in the European Union, and I meet both citizens and different representatives of organizations, trade unions, and so on. So yes, to a certain extent, but I tend to think that this debate is very British in a way. There are individuals in other countries, but overall, the sort of social welfare tourism is a very British issue. It is not that spread in other countries.
And why do you think that is?
Well, for you to tell me.
Well,
I'm a guest in this country.
You could take a view that it is because the nature of our benefit system means that it is easier to claim without contributions. In many countries, it requires a certain level of contributions before you can claim. That's one view. The other view is, as one of your colleagues put it, that UK politicians are pandering to prejudice and xenophobia and are being hysterical.
I don't know who said that, but I wouldn't say it.
Laszlo Andor.
I don't agree with that.
Laszlo Andor.
Well, I think you have a generous welfare system, but so does many other countries. I mean, that's the beauty of the European Union, that we have different systems living side by side. So I don't know what this debate is so very intense in the UK. I certainly know it is, and I've met many people and I've had this debate many times. But I've also failed to get any concrete evidence that there is massive abuse of benefits. We've asked for that because we are boring bureaucrats, non-elected elite in Brussels, and we need to act only by evidence. And we haven't received that evidence that there is a massive abuse going on in this country.
Interestingly, though, Chancellor Merkel, when she was in London last week, did say that she was interested in drawing the distinction, and again, on principle, I wonder if it's one that you draw, between the freedom of movement of people and the freedom of movement to claim benefits. And this was a German chancellor speaking, not a Brit, who said she was interested in that.
Well, freedom of movement is a principle that I defend very much. But of course, like all privileges, all the rights that you have, it also comes with a few duties, and sometimes many duties. And abusing the rights or cheating is never anything we should defend. So if there is a case, and I'm sure there is, we just haven't seen the massive evidence for that, to fight abuses of free movement or rights that people are not entitled to, that goes not only for EU citizens going to another country, but that goes also for citizens of a particular country, to have well-functioning systems that benefit those in need, but where there are certain limits or difficult obstacles for those who want to use them.
I suppose the devil is in the detail of the word. What do we mean by abuse of freedom of movement? Now, some people say there should be freedom of movement of labour, and they draw a distinction between that and freedom of movement of people. In other words, you should be free to get a job, but you shouldn't be free to turn up in any country without a job and want to use the welfare system. Is that a real distinction, or do you think that's a false distinction?
Well, you are allowed to turn up in any country to try to get a job, or to study, or to do tourism, or to do something. But if you fail to find a job, and there's a limit to the time you can use for that, 3 months, then you're not entitled to stay in the country anymore, and you're not entitled to get the benefits. And I know there are lots of discussions on how to interpret this, because sometimes can you claim that you can sustain yourself if you're begging on the streets or if you're playing in the metro or something. We have tried to, with the colleague you referred to with the last rounder, to produce an interpretation of the rules and a set of guidelines how to interpret that in the help to assist cities and member states. And there was a big conference last week with lots of mayors from different cities in order to address this issue and to try to meet the concerns and to respond to the questions on what is allowed, what is not allowed to the treaty.
But in terms of the Commission's work at the moment, there's no particular work being done on changing the definition of freedom of movement.
No.
So when Chancellor Merkel talks about it, it's just at that airy political level at the moment.
Well, I don't know exactly what she said, but if I can guess, I think she meant that, yes, we should defend the freedom of movement and not change that. But of course, if there is evidence that there is an abuse, we could look at that, maybe without changing the treaties, but to look at how we can better cooperate and to exchange ideas and good practices on how to prevent.
The other interesting issue that's being debated is this issue of whether there should be tougher, higher hurdles, if you like, for future accession countries, for countries that join the EU in the future. Do you think there is a case in principle for saying that for Turkey, for example?
We have already raised the obstacles or the criteria, especially in the field of justice and home affairs. We are now starting with all candidate countries or potential countries to look at those particular issues because we know they are the most difficult. Corruption, rule of law, good governance, anti-discrimination, and so on.
But so forgive me, I meant more specifically in terms of the freedom of movement of people. Now, some have argued there should be a longer timescale, not 7 years, but maybe longer. Some have argued that there should be an economic hurdle, that not until a country reaches a certain GDP per head or in relation to the average in Europe. Some have said there should be a cap on the numbers that can come in any year. Do you think there's any argument for those sorts of amendments?
Well, that's obviously for member states to decide. Personally, I don't think so.
Because?
I don't think we should change the rules now. There are already very tough rules for enlargement. Enlargement has been very good for Europe, especially for the UK. No country in Europe has gained so much from enlargement as you have. And it's a good thing if people
just
can
pursue
move
that? Why so?
Sorry?
Why just pursue that thought? Why do you say that Britain has benefited?
If you calculate about Germany has gained a lot as well. But if you calculate what the freedom of movements have brought, how much many people have arrived, how much they've contributed to the social welfare systems, how much taxes they have paid, and they work to a larger extent than British people actually. They benefit less of social welfare, they pay more in taxes, and the investments and the exchange of business has been very beneficial for the UK.
So are you puzzled by the fact that every leading political party in Britain, not just UKIP, regards there being as an immigration problem? Because you describe it as just a net gain.
Well, basically it is, but of course people do not perceive it that way. And I mean,
Whose fault's that?
Well, it's nobody's fault. That's how it is. And well, I can't really explain it, of course, but I realize it's there, and we need to address it, and we need to talk about this, and we need to see how we can address it, and we need all the political parties to discuss these issues based on facts, based on clear evidence. So that's how it is. I can't really explain it. Maybe you can. You're a journalist.
You can ask me the questions later. Let's just go back to Turkey and other accession countries for a second. You signed a readmission agreement. Some people have suggested that means there'll be visa-free travel for Turks in Europe quite soon. Can you tell us a little bit more? How soon before Turks will be able to travel visa-free?
Two agreements, actually, that we, after long discussions and many, many years of negotiations, were able to sign in Ankara just before Christmas. It was one on readmission agreement. That means that Turkey commits itself, once it's entering into force, to take back citizens from Turkey and third countries passing Turkey who are not allowed to stay in Europe. That's a good thing. People who cannot stay and who are from Turkey or who have passed Turkey should be sent back. In addition to do that, we also commit to launch a visa dialogue that once it is, it's about document security, it's about border control, it's about fighting corruption, it's about rule of law as well. That will lead to Turks traveling without visa to Europe.
And how soon could that? I know you don't have it.
No, it's very difficult because we just signed it, but it will take some years. It's not tomorrow.
5, 10?
The Turks said, I think, 3.5 years.
Okay.
That's their ambition.
And there may be people who think visa-free travel from Turkey, massive country, different culture, some people argue. Should they be worried? Or again, should that be seen as a welcome boost to European economy and so on?
Well, actually, there are more Turks going back to Turkey than going to Europe right now, if you look at the statistics, because Turkey has had a big increase, a big growth, and has been a more dynamic economy than many of the European countries. And we need people to come. We need businessmen to come. We need tourists to come. We need to facilitate travel. I do not think that there is a mass of Turkish people who want to come to Europe and just live here, but they want to get rid of the hassle, the administration, the costs, to get a visa to visit their friends in Germany or in London.
I know perfectly reasonably you said the idea of different hurdles was one for member states, you know, the idea of a longer period, for example. But just as someone who observes these things, it's well known the French have always been resistant to Turkish membership. The Germans have got real doubt. The British have tended to be in favour. Do you think those countries could ever back Turkish membership with the existing rules on Turks arriving in their country potentially instantly, at most with 7-year delay?
It's a very difficult question because, the last years, the negotiations with Turkey have been standing still more or less, and we've opened a few chapters, but it's not going back very quickly. Also, the latest development in Turkey is quite worrying, I would say, with the dismissal of the judges, the corruption affairs, and the new internet laws. I mean, it's going in some ways backwards, but some would argue, and I could tend to agree to that we've actually pushed Turkey away from us, because there were a few years with massive reform in Turkey that was very positive, but then we sort of said, stop, you won't be able to join anyway, ever. And then, of course, it took another direction, and that's worrying. So Turkish membership, I think that Turkey belongs in the European Union. That might be a minority view, but it's certainly not for tomorrow.
Now, I mentioned Switzerland at the beginning. We haven't talked about that yet. What is the thinking about how the EU should react to that referendum vote?
Well, although we, of course, respect referendums and the outcome, the EU has deplored the result. We just had yesterday a meeting with the Swiss minister who sort of explained and interpreted the results. It will be very much for them to come back and see how they want to solve this, because, of course, quotas and so on is not... mean, it's not what the European Union is going to deliver quotas for the Swiss for the moment. And you can't cherry pick one part of the free movement. They have a lot of very favorable and beneficial agreements with us.
So what's the ultimate sanction? If they say, no, look, the people have voted, quotas is what they want restrictions on immigration, do you then say the accession treaties ultimately, they all go? Free trade with Europe, that goes. Special relationship goes.
Well, the referendum was only a couple of weeks ago. They have asked us for time to interpret it, to listen around, to find out different ways how to approach it. They have 3 years. And we say, of course, we listen. The Swiss are our friends. They are our neighbors. We'll try to help them. But to just cherry pick is not an option. But to start to negotiate exactly how we solve it, I'm not in a position to do that because I have no idea.
You may know the phrase speak softly and carry a big stick. Now, you're speaking softly. What's the big stick?
But for the moment, it's too early to say.
And
but I was very clear, you cannot cherry pick.
Yes. You were clear about that, but you weren't so clear about what you do if they insist on doing it. Well, there are only two possibilities. You back down or they back down. So you think the Swiss may just go back to the people and say, I know you voted for this, but you can't have it.
As I said, there were 3 weeks ago they voted, and they are still struggling to see how they will move forward. They haven't put that answer to their own citizens yet. They need some time, and they haven't approached us yet. So
I guess that brings me back to where we began, and then I'll open it up for other questions, which is, who's the we in this? You see, it seems to me, listening to you and to your colleagues, that there is, stop me if you think this is wrong, there is a dramatic change has happened in public attitudes to migration. It seems to me throughout Europe, not just in the UK, which seems to have not been reflected in Brussels at all. There is a view that business just continues as usual. Now, if countries like Switzerland vote for changes in migration rules, if electorates vote substantially for parties that are hostile to immigration, if governing parties adopt quite a lot of that agenda, does Brussels really just roll on, saying migration's good for you, freedom of movement's good for you, there is no problem, move along here, we can see nothing?
No, that's not really true. But Brussels is not, a blob somewhere far away from here. Brussels is also a human being. It's us. It's you. It is the citizens and the elected leaders and the European Parliament and the Commission and everybody in Europe. And as far as I noted, there was a quite unanimous view on this from member states, elected leaders in the member states, saying that they deplored the outcome of the Swiss referendum, saying that it was not...
Forgive me, I was making it slightly broader.
Yeah,
a broader
it was
question.
not on the agenda to share it and so on. And, well, of course, the Commission makes proposals, but we do that according to the treaties and the guidelines of member states. And, of course, we should listen. But just because there is a growth in racist parties saying that we should close our borders and not have any immigrants and not accept any refugees from civil wars like Syria, doesn't mean that the majority of us who do not vote for these parties in any country just immediately have to change. I mean, there's something called leadership as well, standing up, defending the values you believe in, and I will continue to do that till my very last day, and then, okay, if I'm outvoted, we'll see.
That's clear. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks. Let me take some questions here. Maybe when the microphone, is there a microphone to come to you? You could just tell us if it's relevant, kind of who you are and whether you represent an organisation.
I was very pleased indeed that the last question was put to you, because it does seem to me that times change, and we need to, the EU generally and the Commission should be thinking about this. Politics change. What was regarded as very acceptable and a very good idea can change over time. I've been through a lot of Sweden, and it's a very underpopulated country compared to England. There's a big difference. And I think to say that we are sort of prejudiced against foreigners and things is really missing the point. We're terribly crowded here. And
I didn't use that word.
Crowded.
I didn't say that.
You didn't hear it?
No,
Okay.
I didn't say I would use the word prejudice.
No. It is said that the reason that we are really just prejudiced, and we should be nicer to foreigners and have them all coming. Anyway, not to take up too much time.
Yes, do you want to put a question to the Commission?
What I would like you to say is, don't you think that we need a little bit less rigidity now, that different parts of the EU have got very different agendas. Their politicians are hearing very different messages.
So you mean specifically on this issue of migration? Yeah. Would that be possible? And clearly there's some flexibility in the sense that some are in Schengen and some are not, as you acknowledged. If a country, let's imagine for a second it is only a UK issue, can there be flexibility? Or do you think freedom of movement is such a fundamental European principle, you're either signed up to it or you're not?
Well, of course, there can always be flexibility, and time changes. And most European laws have changed over time. And of course, there could be adjustments made to this specific freedom of movement. But if we are to reject one of the principles of European Union cooperation since the 50s, that might be the case that there's a majority who think we should do so, then I think at least we should reflect if we are really ready to take all the consequences. And all the discussions I've had on this topic is that there is not a majority of member states representing their citizens who want to do that. On the contrary, this is something that when we discuss it with the ministers who make the decisions, there is an overwhelming majority saying, no, don't touch this. And so far, we have not get any indication that a majority of member states do want to touch it. And if one member state will opt out,
yeah.
You say, okay, we opt out for that. Yes, that could, of course, be a decision, but then we open up a Pandora box where we risk to have 28 different systems, and then
sure.
We have to reflect, is this really worth doing?
Sure, just for clarity, though, I want to get something clear. I mentioned the position of Chancellor Merkel to you. The Austrians have been mentioned, the Danes, the Swedes have been mentioned, the Dutch have been mentioned as having some concerns. I don't mean they want to end freedom of movement for a second, but having some concerns about the way it's currently working.
Okay,
you're not picking that up. No, I'm just interested in, are you picking that up?
No, of course.
Is it being raised in meetings you're in?
Concerns, yes, but demands to change the free movement directive, no.
So what are the demands? Around benefit rules or?
Well, the benefit rules, very few have raised it. But of course, how do we address these issues? How do we work together in a Europe where there are increasing cleavages between those who have and those who have not, with the economic crisis making many people in the European Union living on the streets without jobs, trying to find a better future somewhere. I mean, how do we address this together? There are no easy solutions. I don't have the solutions, but it's a huge challenge, of course.
Thank you. Yeah, sir, gentleman here. If we get the microphone down, there's a couple more at the front afterwards, thanks. There we are. Thanks.
My name is Nisar Shah. I'm a journalist by profession. Can I ask you about the future migration of African and Asians to Europe? You said globally migration is a useful aspect for European economy and other aspects of it. If you confine the Africans to the African continent and the Asians to the Asian continent, then where would Europe stand? So what is the future for Asians and African migration to Europe? Some countries say that they are overcrowded. Some people say we don't want the foreigners. Some is a color prejudice, race, religion, especially for the Muslims and things like that. So this is a very tricky situation in Europe now. How do you solve this problem?
Yeah, obviously there are two different categories. I know, and I didn't ask you about it, so you may wish to take a moment to talk about it. You've done a lot of work on a common asylum policy, which will apply to some of those countries, but in other cases it won't be about asylum, it'll be about economic migration.
Yes, where we do have cooperation on a European level is on asylum. Now, UK is not part of that second generation of rules, but there are a set of common rules on asylum, on qualifications, on the processes, on the administration, on the rules when to get in. But ultimately, every country decides on their own who can stay and who cannot stay. And even more so when it comes to other types of migration. We need, in Europe as a whole, labor migration. We have declining demography, and we are, despite the crisis, lacking skills. So we should be more open to labor migration. But this is a thing decided on a national level, again. Then when we have irregular migrations, people who turn to us for a future, but who are not allowed to stay according to decisions by member states, then we have certain forms of cooperation. So it's not one European Union policy on Africa or on Asia. I think we should open more legal ways, because today people embark in very rickety vessels and drown in the Mediterranean because there are very few legal ways. But of course, and we have done some things there on seasonal workers, for instance, and so on. And then every country is free to decide upon their own. We're just trying to facilitate, but there are no rules on that.
Underlying the gentleman's question may have been this, which is that as elected governments try to control flows, the only thing they can control is migration from outside the EU. So take the British government, but I don't think it's exclusive. All their energies are about now excluding people from outside Europe, because they can't control people coming from Spain and Italy and Portugal because of the Eurozone crisis, let alone from Poland, Lithuania, Romania, Bulgaria and elsewhere.
Or all the hundreds of thousands British pensioners who go to Costa Brava in
Sure.
Spain. Yeah.
Sure, but my point is there is a consequence, or a consequence, whether you like it or not, of freedom of movement has been the shutters going up to people coming from outside the EU. Does that worry you?
Well, we see what's happening in the world. We have a very terrible war just outside, but very close to the European Union in Syria. Of course, we see a slight increase, not as much as in the neighboring countries, a slight increase of people coming from Syria asking for protection here. That is one thing where I think that all the European Union countries should contribute. UK is the third country receiving most, together with Germany, Sweden, France, and Belgium. These 5 countries receive more than 70% of all the asylum seekers in the European Union. Some countries receive 0 or close to 0. So the aim of having common rules is that everybody would be able to receive, so we can share the responsibility a little bit. But on those irregular migration or other types of migration, it is up to every country to decide on their own.
Nick Gowing, a presenter with BBC World News like Nick, delighted to find an hour to be here for an hour this afternoon. Can I press you, Commissioner, on what you've just said about the positives? Because migration is still seen as a dirty word. It's got a stigma. But there are so many positives about migration. Innovation and growth, as you've just said. We've got the German government now who are actively encouraging it because they can see the economic needs. In Australia, we've seen the problem with the boat people, where many of those who've arrived have become great successes in the economy. And I'm still mystified, maybe a little bit as Nick is as well, about how politicians get overwhelmed by the visceral kind of emotive perceptions of migration as a bad thing, and the failure of politicians to actually put the very positive side, whether you're in Germany or in Australia or anywhere. It does seem to be a massive political challenge, given that the imperative is innovation and growth.
No, I fully agree with you. There is a lack of leadership globally on these issues.
But what can the Commission do on that to encourage and push down that track?
All the problems. We're just bureaucrats. But we
I'm not going to be allowed to forget that.
No, I'm just teasing my friend.
Yeah. You forgot the elite bit in the Brussels.
Yeah, but etc. We can't solve all these problems, but we are trying to bring forward the advantages of this, to point at statistics, to point at evidence that you mentioned Germany. Germany needs millions of people, and they are chasing engineers from all over the world, inside the European Union and outside.
It's an active policy.
Yeah, it's an active policy of the German government. We are trying to facilitate for them to recruit and to match the skills and to spread the world and to set up a framework in order to do it. This is probably one of the most challenging things for the future, to see how we can match global skills and how we can make Europe an attractive place to come. Because if you look at OECD, for instance, how people move globally, people who can choose, we talk about now, not refugees, it's going down, Europe. Europe is not as attractive as it used to be. People are going elsewhere. And many very talented Europeans have left. We have seen Portuguese and Spaniards, they are now in Mozambique, Angola, Brazil, Latin America. Many Irishmen have left as well. So we will have problems filling the skills for the future. And this, I would hope that elected politicians would have the courage to speak up and to tell the truth to their citizens.
Isn't the reason that they don't, and then I'll bring in the colleague gentleman here, and then there's a gentleman over there and somebody at the back. So isn't the reason they don't is that if you are well educated, if you live in a capital city, if you are mobile, if you have a degree, yes, all of what you describe is true. But if you're poorly educated, if you're not mobile, migration often means a cut in your living standard, greater competition for jobs, lower wages, and can mean overcrowding of your housing and public services. And shouldn't the Commission address that as well?
It's wonderful how British people complain about the European Union and then the Commission
I'm just a
can solve all
journalist.
the problems.
I just ask questions.
Well, there are rules in the European Union against social dumping, for instance, when
Yep.
it comes to salaries and others, both for EU citizens and non-EU.
You can give advice to the member states. What do you think member states should do
Yeah.
about that problem if you don't think it's a Commission?
Well, the most eminent and the most urgent issue is, of course, to get the economy back on track so that the huge unemployment that we have in Europe, I think 26 million people are unemployed in all 28 countries, that we get the economy back on track, that we can see growth, investments, that people have hope for the future as well, both those well-educated but also others who are not as well-educated, so that they can believe in the future. Because the economic crisis is a very fertile ground for populist movements as well. We have seen that in the past and we see it today.
A gentleman here.
Thank you very much. I'm Timothy Kirkhope. I'm the Conservative spokesman on Justice and Home Affairs in the European Parliament. And I used to be Immigration Minister in this country. And I just really wanted to follow on and ask a question specifically about, if you like, the Europeanization of this extremely delicate area. I've always regarded immigration as being one of those areas where there has always been an enormous amount of national influence on the decisions that are taken over those subjects. Sometimes that's why politicians take a strong line, because clearly that is one of the indicators of an independent nation state, whatever its relationships might be. Could you, and incidentally, may I just say how much pleasure we get working with the Commissioner on this subject area. She's an extremely receptive and extremely good Commissioner, may I say. But I wanted to ask her about the Europeanization issue. Since co-decision with the European Parliament and all the other matters, to what extent this balance between having a European policy, maybe it's a 5-year policy or whatever it may be, but how does that policy really work in her eyes with the needs of independent nations that want to protect their own immigration arrangements, which many others do, not just Britain?
Of course. No, it's very valid and difficult question, of course. But again, to give the more boring and bureaucratic answer is that member states have unanimously, by their heads of states in the European Council, agreed on certain issues. This is where we should take step forwards for European rules. For 14 years, we have worked to get a set of rules on asylum issues, because heads of states have decided on the different summits that we need common rules on this so that all 28 countries can have a level playing field and that we can take responsibility, all of us. Then what the Commission does, together with the co-legislator in the European Parliament now, because now this is an area where we have full co-legislation, is to try to put forward proposals, to negotiate them and to get them through. When it comes to labor migration and when it comes to integration and when it comes to border protection, this is a shared competence, mainly laying with the member states. We can make proposals, we can facilitate, we can exchange best practices, we can cooperate on a daily basis, and we do, but their member states have decided this is our competence, and that's where it is for the time being, so that's where we have to navigate.
Gentleman at the back and then the gentleman at the front here.
Darren Bone from the Royal College of Defence Studies. Excuse me. On the 4th of December last year, you briefed the Commission's recommendations and proposed actions as a result of the Task Force Mediterranean work following the Lampedusa tragedy in October of last year. Assuming that one of the key drivers forcing people, resorting them to take such action, putting themselves in the hands of smuggling gangs, is the global and rising inequality in their homelands, that raises a whole question of potentially insurmountable fundamental issues, and myriad of them. Clearly, issues of education, corruption, lack of capacity, institutional capability could be a sump for EU money over a generation. Whilst laudable as a policy, I just wonder whether human smuggling is an insurmountable dilemma and one that will still hit the headlines and therefore give rise to the wider issues of migration that we're hearing today.
Well, as you say, there are so many countries near the European Union where there is corruption, bad governance, high unemployment, social inequalities, and some of these people will try to come to Europe. So, of course, our foreign policy, our trade policy, our development policy needs to very much focus, as it has, as British does, to try to help these countries develop, to support them in democracy and in growth and so on. I mean, but that doesn't take some time. It's not a week. The business of trafficking and smuggling is huge. It's very profitable. If you travel from a country in the Middle East or in Africa, you probably have to pay 5 or 6 times different smugglers, different ransom, different taxes in order to finally get to a shore where you can put yourself in a boat that maybe will bring you to safety or a better future. I've spoken to many who have made that trip. They know that there's 16-70% risk that you die in the Mediterranean. They know that. They take the risk anyway, because there are very few legal ways. Now, those who drowned in Lampedusa were mainly Eritreans. That is a country where lots of refugees come. You cannot send people back to Eritrea. It's a terrible regime. But others are looking for a future. Of course, all these people cannot come to Europe. What we are trying to do, what we have already initiated, but it has accelerated after the Lampedusa crisis, is to work with third countries, transit countries and third countries, on how to fight smuggling, on how these countries can help to dismantle the networks, because they are cruel criminal networks who gain out of people's misery. We will have next fall, I think in September, a big conference between the European Union and the African Union in order to discuss this particular phenomena. We are engaging very closely with countries such as Morocco and Tunisia, where we have signed agreements, mobility partnership. This is one of the things to work upon. Other countries such as Egypt and Libya, for obvious reasons, are more difficult to work with. We are trying to find channels, but of course we cannot solve this alone. We need to work with the countries of origin and transit on the whole chain.
But you don't think it's a fool's errand? Because I think underlying the question was, in the end, if there are huge imbalances between life on the inside and life on the outside, actually people will still be smuggled, people will still take
people
terrible
have moved
risks.
since Adam and Eve, and they will continue to do so as long as there are differences between
But I suppose the argument could be, is it worth, to put it rather brutally, is it worth spending very large sums of European taxpayers' money to try to persuade people from outside not to come when crudely they're going to come anyway?
Well, I think it is, because if you can save a few lives and if you can improve the conditions and the cooperation, it is worth. And this is also a policy very much supported by the European citizens, I think.
Yeah. Gentleman here at the front. Microphone's just coming.
Thank you very much. The name's Ewan Grant. I'm a former member of the EU Border Assistance Mission to Moldova and Ukraine. Before I ask a quick question, I'd just like to ask, do you have any of your staff here? Because there is a specific issue I would like to raise with them afterwards with these issues.
I do, yes.
Oh, lovely, thank you. That relates to the Afghanistan post.
Okay, can you do that afterwards? What's your question?
The question is, in view, you referred to Libya and the previous gentleman's point about Lampedusa. The deteriorating and very difficult situation for the border controls and migration systems within some of our near transit countries like Libya and now Ukraine. How confident are you that the situations there won't have too much of an impact here? Is there a need for more and perhaps better targeted support to these countries? You mentioned how difficult it would be in Libya, of course. And accepting that the key challenges, of course, are solving poverty and misgovernment in source countries. What's the situation about Frontex? Is there a need for a significant beefing up of the resources of Frontex, quantitatively and qualitatively?
Thank you very much for your question.
Okay, on Libya, well, we are from the European Union, both as a whole, but also individual member states, trying to assist Libya, of course, after the fall of Gaddafi and the very fragile country or system that is being brought up there. It is a difficult country to cooperate with. They have it's a very weak government, as you know. But of course, we are trying to help them in different ways. It is also a huge country, that bordering to many other countries. It has traditionally been a transit country. It traditionally hosted millions of guest workers. Of course, after the war, many of them went back. Some came to Europe. And some are now trying to come back to Libya as well, because Libya is a big, can offer many job opportunities. And we are interested in trying to deepen that cooperation with Libya, difficult as it is. With Ukraine, well, let's wait and see what happens. It's on all our minds, of course. For the moment, there has not been any increase of refugees coming from Ukraine, but of course, if the situation escalates, we just discussed this with ministers yesterday, how the neighboring countries are contingency planning and how we can assist them in case of. Frontex, yes. Frontex is, for those, well, probably all of you know, but the border management agency of the European Union. Well, I would argue it has received a lot more resources the last years. It has really grown, one of the fastest growing agencies of the European Union. But of course, a lot is expected from it. Frontex does not have any proper staff on its own. It is not a border guard agency. It's coordinating member states, border guards, police, and others. And in the board where member states are represented, there's always wish for more. We have limited resources. Member states have cut the EU budget. We are trying to do the best we can. After the Lampedusa crisis, there was a call for Frontex to be even more present in the Mediterranean, to save lives, to detect, to be there, to guard the borders. Everybody calls for it, but nobody's really putting up the money, and we can't make magic. So yes, I think we could do more out of Frontex. There is an ongoing discussions whether Frontex should be beefed up to a real border guard European agency. Some countries think it should, and we are making an impact assessment of that to discuss with member states beginning of the fall or next year.
Okay, thank you very much. We've just got a few minutes left. I thought I'd just wind up with a few more general questions. When you look ahead to the challenges that are coming, what are the things that kind of slightly keep you awake at night? Syria, presumably? Mm-hmm. Ukraine now? Mm-hmm. Talk us through. What are the ones that you're thinking?
Well, Eritrea as well, I must say. Those issues individually, but also the issue of migration in general, I would say, because this is the issue that will be top agenda for the coming decades, probably, and on all the items we have touched upon today. How can we have a policy in the European Union where we give shelter to those in need, where we are an open Europe, where we welcome people to come and work, but still manage migration in a way that is fair, that is dignified, but that is also respected and approved upon by the citizens.
Let's just take some of the countries sorry, forgive me.
This is a huge challenge, how we do this, how we manage all these different political sensitivities, our sort of humanitarian decency, but also economic needs, as the gentleman there referred to, the need for growth and innovation and openness, and how we do that.
Let's just take some of those individual countries. I mean, do you think it's going to be sustainable for Europe to take numbers from Syria in the tens, hundreds, low thousands, or do you think eventually this Syrian crisis is going to force European countries to take tens and hundreds of thousands of Syrian refugees?
Well, it doesn't look as if it will be solved tomorrow. And the neighboring countries who have received almost 3 million refugees are now starting to close their borders. I mean countries like Lebanon is imploding. So far, only 80,000 have come to Europe. 80,000 out of 3 million refugees, so that's very little. But there will be more coming, yes. And I would wish those who have arrived are mainly in 6 or 7 countries. I would wish all 28 countries to open for a little bit more so we can help the very most vulnerable, the children, the victims of torture, and some women.
And this current crisis, do you fear that a lot of Ukrainians could make their way to the EU?
I think it's not an imminent threat for the moment. We have not seen any tendency of border movements in that. But we must, of course, prepare. That's our duty, to prepare, to make sure that the neighboring countries are prepared, to see how we can support them.
And have those conversations begun already?
We had them yesterday when we met with all the interior ministers. We talked about with the Polish, the Slovaks, etc. They all confirmed that there hasn't been any movement, but we are, of course, preparing. But the Ukraine crisis is much bigger than that, and it worries me a lot.
Now, you quite properly teased me about what role the Commission does have and what the Commission doesn't have. So give advice, because you were a politician before you were a commissioner, and you're still in many ways a politician. If, as seems to be the case, mainstream parties in the UK want to, in some way, change the interpretation of freedom of movement. The Labour Party have said it, the Conservatives have said it as well, the Liberal Democrats said they'd be up for it in certain circumstances. What should they do?
Well, they should define exactly what's the problem today and give evidence for that. Try to define a few concrete solutions and search allies in the European Union in a constructive way. That's how we usually do things in the European Union.
Have they hope of doing it?
Well, I hope so.
Do you think they can succeed?
If they do it that way, they can.
Who are their possible allies?
Well, most countries, if there is a problem in the European Union, we change it. But we need to think through all the phases. We need to identify the problems. We need to see the different possible solutions, and then we try to work it out. But we don't change things just because suddenly there is a little movement of criticism. I'm not saying that this is the case. I know this is a very serious issue in the UK. But you need to approach it in a calm and sensible way.
And we've talked quite properly, because it's your responsibility, almost exclusively about migration. Let's just, in our last couple of minutes, just widen out to see how you see the wider European scene. Do you see, clearly post the Eurozone crisis, there is a debate about whether Europe should now change its treaties to deal with the Eurozone crisis, and then very much a British point of view to deal with wider concerns in Britain. Do you see that happening? Of course, it's for the member states, not the Commission. I just wonder.
No, true.
Become me, be a commentator for a second.
I think there is a reluctance to do major treaty changes in any area for the moment. Member states still have very fresh in memory different referendums, different painful domestic debates, and also an awareness that if we start opening up, there will be wish lists coming from 28 countries. So for the moment, I think that will not happen the coming few years. But of course, there are problems in the Lisbon Treaty that are not sufficiently handled. There are issues that need to be addressed. There are technicalities, but very important in the Eurozone to really make it work again. So sooner or later, we will have to do that. But then in a way where we have intergovernmental conferences where we set the agenda and agree upon that. And I think in some years that will happen, but it's not this year, not next year.
No, and if David Cameron were re-elected British Prime Minister, could he get the changes that he says he needs?
I think any British Prime Minister can get changes, but he or she would need to define what he wants.
Now, last question. I don't know. Are you a betting woman?
I always lose.
Who do I put money on? Juncker? Christine Lagarde? What do you think? Is it time for a woman at the head of the European Commission?
It would be high time for a woman, yes.
I think that's a backing for Christine Lagarde, don't you, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you very, very much.
Someone you haven't mentioned. Usually the case that it comes in very late.
You think so? Give us a hint. Nationality? No? So a mystery woman that we don't yet know about.
A Brit?
A Brit?
Who knows?
There we are. You heard it here first. Thank you very much indeed for being so nice and dealing with the questions.